I'd like to welcome you to our assembly this morning. We're thankful to be here and thankful on this, the Lord's Day, for this time and opportunity of worship. We're thankful for the opportunity we have already had of gathering around the table together and of remembering our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And now we have the opportunity this morning to study just a little bit from God's Word. And I'd like to spend our time together with you this morning in a familiar story. Typically in the summer times we take a bit of a break from our series and kind of have individual topics. And so just thinking of some of the Old Testament stories. We've been reading, Torah here lately, and it's just been a long time since I preached on some of them. So I wanted to do some of that this summer. And the very first story I was thinking about is the story of Daniel and the lions, or Daniel and the lion's den. And so as we study this together this morning, I'd like to begin with you actually in the book of Ezekiel. And if you'll read with me here in Ezekiel chapter 14, we're going to find mention of Daniel. Ezekiel 14, if you'll find there verses 12 through 14, here's what the Bible says. The word of the Lord came again to me, saying, Son of man, when a land sins against me by persistent unfaithfulness, I will stretch out my hand against it. I will cut off its supply of bread, send famine on it, and cut off man and beast from it. Even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver only themselves by their righteousness. It's kind of interesting. If you skip down there to verse 20, there's his name again. And if you read Ezekiel 28, there's his name again. 3 times in the book of Ezekiel, he makes mention of this guy Daniel. And in Ezekiel 14, both times he makes it reference to him, along with these 2 other great men of faith, Noah and Job. What's interesting about these references is Ezekiel and Daniel are contemporaries. They live at the same time. And Ezekiel has a different job than Daniel. Daniel's kind of the messenger to the kings. Ezekiel is the messenger to the exiles. And he's out there with the children of Israel who have been exiled from their land. And that's where he spends his time, by the rivers of Babylon. Anyway, it's interesting to me that Daniel, even in his day, in his time before he dies, he is known as a man of such great faith that he is in the same category as people like Noah and Job. Daniel is a remarkable character. And as Daniel is thought about by Ezekiel and placed into this particular category, we can see he was held in that esteem from even before he died. And so what about the New Testament view of Daniel? Well, the view doesn't dim. Daniel's reputation, doesn't fade with time. Sometimes as we go along, great people are forgotten about and kind of go by the wayside, and all of a sudden they weren't maybe as great as we thought they were in their time, but that didn't happen to Daniel. In Hebrews 11, when the writer here of Hebrews lists all these great heroes of faith, as he gets towards the end of the chapter, it's almost like he can't just keep on writing. And so he says, What more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, and stopped the mouths of lions. That phrase just calls to mind a name, doesn't it? The name Daniel. Stop the mouths of lions. Even in the New Testament, of course, the references to Daniel are always positive. Daniel is a legend even in the days of the New Testament. And what about today? I feel like I've been reading children's Bibles for 20 years now, more than 20 years. And we're reading another one. Had to go buy a new one. And I notice in these little Bibles, they don't all have exactly the same stories. But there's a few stories that make every single one of them. And one of those stories is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. I think it's in almost maybe it is in every single Bible book, little Bible that we've ever had. Daniel is seen as a legend from the time he was alive until today. He is seen as a legend. And why is that? You know, when you think about Daniel, he's not like Moses. He didn't, lead the children of Israel out of Egypt toward the promised land. He's not like Joshua, and he led them into some great battle. Or like David, where he settled them in Jerusalem and builds the infrastructure that would be the fulfillment of God's promises to them. Daniel doesn't do all of that. Instead, we kind of get these little views into Daniel's life scattered over the course of his life that show us his greatness. We're introduced to him in Daniel chapter 1, where he's gone from his homeland and taken to the distant land of Babylon. He's a slave. And Daniel makes his mark in Daniel chapter 1 by refusing to eat the diet of an idolater. Not that it was wrong to eat meat or anything like that, but he didn't want to eat what was offered to idols, so he wouldn't. And he did really well. All of that decision, his refusal to partake of that diet, called attention to his intellectual abilities, which apparently were significant. And Daniel begins his rise. In chapter 2, as all the wise men begin being put to death because they can't tell Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel prays. And God gives Daniel that message, and Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar his dream. In chapter 4, we get along toward maybe more into his middle-aged years. And what does Daniel do? Again, Daniel explains a dream to Nebuchadnezzar. And as you get kind of into chapter 5, as middle age begins to sort of give way to whatever comes after that, there's Belshazzar, and he's dealing with the writing on the wall, and he solves that riddle. What is it about Daniel that makes him such a legend? The thing that makes him so great, the thing that makes Daniel so tremendous, is his consistent faithfulness. He is consistently faithful. And whatever circumstance he is in, he is the same. He is faithful to God. He doesn't deviate, he doesn't change. And if he's given an easy job or a hard job, it doesn't make any difference about his relationship to God. If he's in an easy circumstance or a hard one, his relationship with God does not change. His consistent faithfulness over the course of his entire life is why Daniel is a legend. And now we get to Daniel chapter 6, perhaps the most legendary story about Daniel. And as you get to Daniel chapter 6, Daniel's now well past mid-age. Daniel now is around 80 years old. Some scholars say he would have been 82 years old in Daniel chapter 6. And in Daniel chapter 6, something phenomenal happens. The very end of chapter 5 verse 31 should actually be connected to the story of chapter 6. Because Belshazzar, is slain, he's with the Chaldeans, and then here comes Darius. When you read that, it almost looks like one Babylonian king goes to the next. That's not what that says. Belshazzar is with the Babylonian Empire. Darius is with the Medo-Persian Empire. In those two verses right there, there's a change of world powers. As Daniel gets towards the end of his life, the people in charge of the world change. And instead of the Babylonians running everything, where he spent most of his life living under the rule of the Babylonians, all of a sudden now here come the Medo-Persians. And the first Medo-Persian king is a guy named Cyrus. And what appears to be described here in Daniel 6 and perhaps other places is that Darius is like maybe the underboss to Cyrus. He's kind of in charge of whatever was the Chaldean Empire. But Cyrus wants bigger than that. Anyway, so there's Darius. And Darius is 62. He's younger than Daniel. But he's given this job, and what does he have to do? Let's begin in Daniel chapter 6. And if you'll have your Bibles open, we're going to kind of just walk through Daniel 6 together. Let's look here, beginning at verses 1 through 3. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. And so Darius has got to quickly put things in order. He's got to organize things. And so he figures out over this territory he's going to put 120 guys that are kind of over different regions. And the goal of it is that the king would suffer no loss. So here's the real thing about all of this. What is this organization and all of that? What is that about? It is about revenue. The king doesn't want to lose money. So what are you going to do? Get organized so you can make sure you're charging people and collecting the money. That's what these 120 guys are supposed to do. They're supposed to make sure the revenue is coming in. And they're going to build in some accountability here. So these 120 guys, what are they going to do? They're going to divide them up in between these 3 guys. And so you kind of have something of an organization beginning to appear here. And Daniel, where does Daniel end up? Daniel's one of those 3. Now that makes sense to us because we know Daniel. I want you to understand that makes 0 sense in the real world, because Daniel is a Judean slave. He's a Judean slave. Why is he in charge of anything? But there he is telling these big shot Medo-Persians how to collect the funds from all these people they've just conquered. Why are you telling us? You're one of the ones we conquered. But among those 3, he stands out because he has an excellent spirit. And if that's describing maybe his relationship with God, or if it's just describing kind of the way he carries himself, his natural disposition, I'm not real sure. But the way Daniel is, which came from the inside and went out into how he lived, his core, well, it's just marvelous. It's just marvelous. And it's great, isn't it? As he's promoted, he doesn't change. He's the same guy. He succeeds. He has power. He has authority. And he's just this great person, just like he's always been. And the guy, Darius, is like, man, I like how this is working. Maybe you should run everything. It's a lot like the story of Joseph, isn't it? Joseph and Daniel, so similar in that way. Anyway, so there's Daniel promoted, and it looks like he's even going to be promoted more. So what begins to develop? Let's start reading now in chapter 6 and verse 4. So here's what they say. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful. Nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So these governors and satraps, I meant to forward that. Okay, I lost my spot here, sorry. Verse 5, these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find against him concerning the law of his God. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree. Sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. So here develops the initial scenes of Daniel's problem. And as these guys look around and they see Daniel's success, the fires of jealousy ignite within them. Jealousy. And maybe they're thinking something like, what happens to him should have happened to me. The opportunities he is getting are opportunities I deserve. He's undeserving. He's unqualified. And jealousy is, self-centered. And it's built around the idea of what I deserve, what I'm entitled to. And not all jealousy is wrong. It's not wrong, for a husband or wife to have a connection together and to have a feeling of entitlement to a unique connection with your spouse. That's right. That's how that should be. But this kind of jealousy, this is not that. This is not built around a relationship that God has sanctioned and all of that, like marriage. This is just simple self-promotion. And so they begin looking through the laws of the kingdom. Let's find a way in which Daniel's breaking the laws. And as they looked, they couldn't find, one translation says, either negligence or corruption. So they couldn't find any way in which he's not doing what he's supposed to do, or in which he is doing things he's not supposed to be doing. They couldn't find any way to criticize the guy. It's a remarkable thing, isn't it? Here he is all the way at the end of his life. And when they literally start rummaging through his closet looking for what they can find in his life that would embarrass him, they find nothing. What a wonderful life Daniel has lived. And we think about this. We think about the challenge that we need to live up to live faithful lives, to be who we're supposed to be all the time. It has not ever been, it is not now, God's will that we pretend to be something when we're with church people and we're something different when we're away from them. That we pretend to be something with our family and we're something different when we go away from our family. All that, code switching or whatever you want to call it, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the same people all the time. Well, that's what Daniel does. Daniel's the same guy. He's faithful. He's who he's supposed to be. And when they examine his life, he's who he's supposed to be. He's submissive to God. He's also submissive, by the way, to this government. All right, so they figured out, we're not going to get him this way. We're going to have to write a new law. And they didn't call it the Daniel law, but that's really what it is. It's the Daniel law. They're targeting him. And the law says you can't appeal to any god or any person other than Darius for the next 30 days. Now, kind of what appears to be the motive, like why would Darius have looked at that and thought that was a good thing? What this law really ultimately does is it puts Darius in the position of a mediator. It's not that these gods wouldn't be receiving requests from these people. It's that the request would come through Darius to these different gods or to these different authorities or whatever. And it's kind of a rule that kind of puts him on good standing with all of these different gods and all of these different people. That's kind of how that would have appealed to him. And so everything comes to Darius, and then Darius gives it to all of these different gods and authorities. And he says, great idea. I'll sign it. I'll sign it. What's behind this signature? Is there ignorance? Is there naivete? Is there, as has sometimes been accused, a lack of intelligence on his part? I don't know. It's a bad decision, though. He signed something he doesn't really truly understand. So let's read verses 10 through 15. Here's what happens next. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for this decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. And these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. And so we recognize here what happens next. Daniel goes home. He knows about this law, and he goes to his house, and he has this upper room. This upper room has some windows. And you know, as you read this description, the thing that kind of jumps out to me is how private this is. This is a private place. And Daniel's not looking to broadcast to the whole entire world. This is a private place for him to spend time alone with the Creator. And he opens his windows toward Jerusalem. And he kneels down and he prays and gives thanks. There's several things there of interest. First of all, he prays toward Jerusalem. And this is something that Solomon had prayed about in 1 Kings chapter 8 when he established the temple, that God's people would be able to do that wherever they were, and that God would listen to them if they, prayed toward the temple. What's interesting is, as Daniel prays in Daniel 6, what's the temple look like? The temple was destroyed a long time before Daniel prays in Daniel 6. What's Jerusalem look like? Jerusalem's a conquered capital. Who's in charge of Jerusalem? Well, not King David's descendants. All of that blew up. Why did it blow up? Because they had rebelled against God. But did that blow up Daniel's faith? It did not. Daniel, 400 years after Solomon prayed that prayer, kneels down and prays, just like Solomon had prayed, and God had granted that request about 400 years before. Daniel's faith is steady. And as he prays, he petitions and gives thanks. Here's this unjust decree that is targeting him. And he talks to God about it, no doubt about it. But his prayer also includes thanksgiving. Boy, on a rough day and a rough season, it is so easy for our prayers to just be drenched, immersed in requests. And that's about it. And our prayer life is just us telling God what we need. That is not how prayer is ever supposed to have worked. Yes, we talk to God about what we need. We offer our supplications. That's part of it. But giving of thanks has always been a significant part of what God wants us to have in our prayers. And on this difficult day, Daniel gives thanks. And he does this as was his custom. This is what he always did. It's an informative thing, isn't it, that a man like Daniel, who becomes a legend in his own time, how did he do that? One of the central components of his success is a consistent prayer life. Prayer is a priority to him. 3 times a day, he's going to pray. 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening, he's going to pray to God. A consistent, disciplined prayer life is a significant component of Daniel's success. And here in these upper room, as Daniel carries out his prayer like he always would have, there are these spies. And I don't know where they are. I don't know how they can see what he is doing. But you kind of imagine, these pathetic characters, quite frankly. Are they looking through a keyhole? Are they over on some roof somewhere else with a telescope trying to look in and see about Daniel? It's a pathetic operation. But, the fires of jealousy drive us to pathetic decisions, quite frankly. And so here they are, spying on this godly man and his private prayer life. And they bring the charge. They don't take it to him, they take it to the king. Remember your rule. The king immediately feels regret, doesn't he? He immediately realizes what's happened. And he also knows, I can't change this rule. Spends the day trying to figure out how to get around it. And to have given up this law for this king would have cost him not just his reputation, but potentially even his own life. There's no way around it. As the sun comes down, verses 16 and 17, here's what it says, 16 through 18. The king gave command, and they brought Daniel, cast him into the den of lions. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he'll deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. And the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him, and his sleep went from him. So the king he's cornered. There's absolutely no way around it. So he gives a command he never wanted to give. Take this 82-year-old man and go throw him into a den of lions. Exactly what this den would have looked like, we actually don't know. It's been suggested often that this den might have had, a couple of different openings. An opening, obviously, at the top that they roll the stone over. But these dens, maybe they had something like a side entrance down below as well. Anyway, if that's exactly how it looked or not, I don't know. But there they are. There are these lions. And being trapped in that den, it seems, they're not finding any prey anywhere. And you talk about jealousy driving. Nothing is more jealous than a lion at dinner time. They're going to get theirs. And so here comes this fresh meat. Darius makes this parting comment. He says, your God's going to take care of you. Why does he believe that? Does he know the story, a rather similar story in Daniel 3 of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Does he know about the deliverance that they experienced? Does he know about the decrees of Nebuchadnezzar, about the greatness of the God of Daniel? I don't know, but he has this belief for some reason, maybe this hope. And so down Daniel goes, and they seal the den. and the king goes home. We notice the influence Daniel's had on Darius already, but this night his influence grows because he doesn't have musicians in. This guy would have probably had music and concubines at night, but he doesn't. Instead, he spends the night fasting, no doubt calling out to God. What a change Daniel's affected in this man's life. And he spends a sleepless night. Why? He spends a sleepless night because of regret. Because he realizes all of a sudden his decisions have hurt others. Oh boy, sometimes we spend sleepless nights with regret. All of us do. And that hits the heaviest when we realize we've hurt someone that we care about. And that our bad decisions have put someone we care about in a difficult circumstance. Well, there's the regret Darius feels. A good, godly man has been fed to lions because of his mistake. The weight of regret. So he gets up early the next morning. Look what happens in verses 19 to 23. The king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. And the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I've done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. And Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. As the king gets out there very early in the morning, that wasn't hard to do. He hadn't slept all night. And he runs out. It mentions here a lamenting voice. He's screaming. It's a scream. And I'm sure just as he got close enough where he thought his screams would reach Daniel, he's crying out, did the living God protect you? The living God. What a beautiful designation. The living God. The living God, that particular title is used, I think it's 15 different times throughout the Old Testament. It's used in the New Testament too. And it's used to kind of indicate two significant things about the God we serve. First of all, He is alive in contrast to the idols who are dead. He is alive, but also, not just that He is alive, the second thing is that He is active. He is active in giving life and in influencing life on planet Earth. And His magnificent actions are evident throughout our world. He is the living God. He's the God who's alive. And we can see His movements and see His actions all around us every day. It's a dangerous thing in a way. In our time, we can sometimes feel, distant from God, as if He's way far away, not really involved in what I'm doing right here. But that's not true. He's alive and He's active around you and in your life every day. And it's not a myth and it's not something that's been made up. It's real. He really did create the world. He really did accomplish all the things that the Bible say He does, and He really is engaged in the activities of earth today. He is the living God. He's not on vacation. He is actively involved today. And Darius wonders, did that living God deliver Daniel? And Daniel cries out King, live forever. In other words, I'm good, King, you're good, and we're good. Daniel doesn't, have any bitterness apparently toward this king. Maybe, he would have been somewhat justified with maybe something of a grouchy response. But he doesn't. He's noble. He's respectable. And he explains how the angel had come. Maybe reminding us of the fourth man that walked with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Here comes this angel, this messenger. And the angel shuts the mouth of the lions. Daniel takes no credit himself. He gives all the credit to God and His angel. And these angels has shut the mouth of the lions. Did he see the angel? Maybe. Somehow he knows that's what happens. And he says, by the way, King, I was protected by God because I didn't do anything wrong to God, and I didn't do anything wrong to you. And so the king gladly pulls Daniel back up. And as he's examined, he has suffered no injury. Exactly like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These two stories are similar on purpose. By the way, that's not what we're going to talk about this morning, but they're similar on purpose. As Daniel has brought up, the king now turns his attention to these other men. And look at verse 24. He gives the command. And they brought those men out who had been accused, or who had accused Daniel. And they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. I'm not really glad to read that verse. That's not the way we would want that story necessarily to end. That verse lets you recognize how brutal this ruler is, Darius. He is a brutal man. And the Medo-Persians are a brutal people. They're not living by the law of the Old Testament. The Old Testament, has this law where you don't execute a child for the crimes of the parent. The Medo-Persians don't care about that law. They execute everybody. They don't care. They just throw them all down there. Josephus provides a reason. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But Josephus says, and he's a Jewish historian from the first century, that these accusers of Daniel made the accusation after Daniel's delivered. They said, well, the reason the lions left them alone is because they had been fed already. They weren't hungry. And that's why Daniel was delivered. And so Josephus says, Darius basically says, okay, let's see. And he brings those lions dinner, throws dinner down in there to them. And they get all fed up and they're full. And then he says, now let's see if your explanation holds. And he throws them all down. That's what Josephus says happens. I don't know, I'll give it to you. Whatever the explanation is, what it does prove, not only the brutality of Darius, it also proves that that is not true. These lions didn't leave Daniel alone because they weren't hungry or they weren't going to eat or any of that. That's not what happened. Because given the opportunity, they ate. They're aggressive, and they eat and attack these people before they even hit the ground. So Daniel's deliverance is something that is miraculous. It is the action of God. It is not explained by anything natural. It is the action of the living God. Having witnessed all of this, Darius now issues a decree. Verse 25 through 27, here's what it says. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and receives, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on the earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So here's Darius's decree. Reminds us of one that Nebuchadnezzar had sent out as the ruler of Babylon. Now here comes a message from the ruler of the Medo-Persians. Daniel's ministry, really, his work he's explaining God to these kings. And here you have the second empire, and that empire, they send out an edict too. Now this edict is informative. In this edict, Darius is still a polytheist. He is not saying there's only one God and no others. That's not what this decree says. That's not what Darius believes, apparently. He just believes that the God of Daniel's kind of above all the other gods. It's also not the way faith works. You can't just make a rule and tell somebody else, believe in God. That's not how faith works. I can't force someone else to believe, and someone else can't force me to believe. And so Darius is certainly not all the way there. He doesn't really understand how all of this works, but he does understand something extraordinary has happened. And it is because of the God that Daniel continually serves. And it's his kingdom that's going to last. There's kind of 4 different reasons he gives here. But anyway, his view of Daniel's God is now exalted. And at the end, what happens to Daniel? Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And so that's Darius that we started with, and Cyrus, who's the main guy. Their co-reign, the way they worked together, Daniel did great throughout that time. Daniel was protected by God because he believed. You know, as you think about Daniel, as we all think about it together, it's perhaps not likely that we are going to be seen as legends before we die, and that we're going to be grouped with Noah and Job in letters written to the whole entire world. But you know, we can be legends, if I can use that word, in our own little world where we live, with our family. And we can be legends with the people that we're around, with our friends, with our relatives, with our congregation. And what is the key? How did Daniel do that? Daniel did that by being consistently faithful to God. And today you can't maybe get a meeting with a king, but every one of us, we can be faithful to the Lord. Every one of us, we can be faithful to the tasks that God has assigned to us in this life. Daniel's faithfulness was demonstrated not just in his spiritual life, but in the way he carried out his work life, his relationships, all through his life. You can see his consistent faithfulness. And so in the work we do, you can see our faithfulness. In our regular devotion to God, you can see our faithfulness. Our desire to consistently worship with a congregation, but also our desire to consistently devote time to connecting with God through prayer and on a one-on-one basis throughout our week. We can be faithful, as Daniel was, to share the message, the truth about God with others, even realizing they might not fully comprehend it. But we can help them maybe walk along little by little to grow their view and understanding of God. And we can, every one of us, be faithful in the roles that we have within our own families. The way Daniel became a legend is because Daniel was consistently faithful. And so we today, although we don't have a king as the audience, we can be consistently faithful. Trusting in the living God. Faithful when we're promoted, faithful when we're persecuted, faithful when we're young, faithful when we're old, faithful. Living our lives full of faith everywhere we go. In this way, we can follow the example of Daniel, who lived a life that was honored by both God and man. This morning, are you willing to commit to living a life of faithfulness like Daniel? If you've never yet obeyed the gospel, I want to encourage you to do that this morning. If you have obeyed the gospel but you faltered and need to make correction, we hope that you'll do that. Want to be the case, please come while we stand and while we sing.